If you want to test your knowledge on intelligence from the perspective of psychology, you've come to the right place. So the first question I have for you is, which of the following is a current criticism of emotional intelligence? The answer is C, and that is that emotional intelligence is not a form of intelligence and should be called emotional competence. So some psychologists believe that the concept of intelligence is being stretched too far from its original focus on mental ability. They would prefer a different term, such as emotional competence, to distinguish this concept from the traditional mental skills concept of intelligence. Question 2. Research on inspection time has shown which of the following? And the answer is B. About a quarter of differences in IQ scores can be explained by different speeds of basic processing, which means that how fast someone can solve something doesn't really correlate with their IQ scores that well. There may be a quarter of difference that can be explained by this. So which of the following best describes the relationship between intelligence and IQ? IQ is regarded as a good measure of intelligence. Question 4. Which of the following individuals has had the largest impact on modern-day tests of IQ? Keyword, modern. The answer is David Wechsler. Question 5. Factor analysis is what? It is a statistical technique that allows a researcher to reduce many measures to a smaller number of clusters. Question 6. Charles Spearman noted that performances on different measures of intelligence are highly correlated with each other. He therefore proposed that intelligence is mostly determined by a single factor, which he called the G factor. So all of the following are examples of tests that measure fluid intelligence, except a vocabulary test. The broad abilities at the second stratum of Carroll's three-stratum theory of cognitive abilities include basic cognitive functions, such as memory and learning, perceptual abilities, and speed of mental functioning. These functions are most similar to Thurstone's primary mental abilities. Okay, so Carroll's three-stratum theory of cognitive abilities. The three-stratum theory is a theory of cognitive ability proposed by the American psychologist John Carroll in 1993. It is based on a factor analytic study of the correlation of individual difference variables from data such as psychological tests, school marks, and competence ratings from more than 460 data sets. These analyses suggested a three-layered model where each layer accounts for the variations in the correlations with the previous layer. So, what I just said in pictures. So there's Spearman's G factor, there's Thurstone's primary mental abilities, and then you can sort of separate them into specific abilities. So here are Thurstone's primary mental abilities, and Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, just for reference here. So Gardner doesn't really put them into specific testable ways like Thurstone does. He sort of vaguely associates a relationship between two types of intelligences, like visual, spatial, linguistic, verbal. Okay, so Carroll's three-stratum theory of cognitive abilities, here they are. We've got the G factor up the top, which underpins all of this. And the broad is all of this here: fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, general memory and learning. And then you can test these things through specific cognitive perceptual and speed tasks. So question 8, with a little bit more explanation. Thurstone focused more on practical and specific skills. Spearman spoke about a common underlying mental ability which allowed an individual to master anything. Cattell refers to our ability to be creative and remember information. And Gardner refers to vague mixtures of intelligences, just to distinguish between all of the theories. Question 9. Results of factor analysis on intelligence tests have revealed what? You know what I mean. Although verbal and mathematical factors are distinct, they also share something common, which has led some to conclude that there is a general mental ability. Question 10. So you score 92 out of a possible 100 on a psychological test. 3 days later, you get a score of 42 on the same test. Other people who have taken the test twice have also had similar positive and negative changes in scores. These results mean that this test has a low test retest reliability. Internal external reliability would give consistent scores because the issues are permanent, in a way. So low retest, yeah, makes sense. Internal external reliability would give consistent scores because the issue... Did I just repeat myself? I did repeat myself. Impressive. So if you keep doing the test and return back similar scores, then the test is a high retest reliability. Question 11. Dr. DeLay has developed a new test for math stability, but because the test relies heavily on word problems, the test is actually a better measure of verbal comprehension. This test doesn't measure the concept that Dr. DeLay originally intended it to, so you'd say that this test has poor construct validity. So, predictive validity is mentioned here. So, predictive validity refers to measurements' ability to predict scores on another related measurement. So, the ACT and SAT are prime examples of measurements that purport to have high predictive validity with college GPA. In other words, if high scores on the SAT are positively correlated with high GPAs and vice versa, then the SAT is said to have predictive validity. Or if you're in Australia, if you have a high ATAR score and as a result gain a high GPA in university, then you would say ATAR has predictive validity. So construct validity is essentially, this deals with whether the assessment is measuring the correct construct. For example, is this human biology exam actually measuring human biology constructs? Yeah, they got a name for everything in psychology. Question 12. The traditional midpoint of the distribution of IQ scores is 100. Because of the Flynn effect, this midpoint remains at 100, but the IQ score distribution has to be recalculated upward periodically. So what is the Flynn effect? The Flynn effect refers to the observed rise over time in standardized intelligence scores documented by Flynn in 1984 in a study on the intelligence quotient. So the IQ score gains in the standardized samples of successive versions of Stanford, Binet, and Wechsler intelligence tests. So interesting, we're getting smarter as time progresses, that's good. Question 13. Why are current intelligence tests sometimes not suitable for non-Western cultures? The educational systems and intelligence skills needed in non-Western cultures differ greatly from those of Western cultures. Question 14. Robert Sternberg's theory of successful intelligence states that intelligence is whatever is required to meet the adaptive demands of a given culture, and I absolutely agree with Sternberg. So this is Mr. Sternberg. I really like this article, so I'm going to read the whole thing. Our latest work on this was written by Sternberg. So our latest work on adaptive competence is based on my theory of adaptive intelligence. The basic idea of theory is that we no longer can afford to define intelligence merely as G or IQ. Doing so has been a disaster. Literally, not merely figuratively. At the same time that IQs have benefited from the 30-point increase of the 20th century, the world has been coping or often failing adequately to cope with disasters that are perhaps unprecedented in human history. These disasters include human-induced global warming, air and water pollution that are killing millions of people, income disparity that has resulted in staggering gains to the wealthiest 1% of the population at the expense of everyone else, hunger, poverty, a global pandemic, and a country torn apart. My own, the US, by deliberate and cynical manipulation on the part of politicians and the self-serving sycophants, oh my gosh, to name a few problems. I like this guy. So where exactly have the high IQs of our current population been as these problems have become more severe? Think about it. If the high IQs did measure intelligence, we really wouldn't have these problems. So his work on adaptive intelligence is based on the notion that intelligence is and always has been primarily about adaptation to the environment, broadly defined. 100% agree. To persist in a notion of intelligence that has proven worse than useless in solving, much less even distressing societal problems, is negligent. It is an ostrich-like act of scientists sticking their heads in the sand. We currently have 3 projects on measuring adaptive intelligence. These projects involve presenting students with real-world problems and ask them to define the problems, figure out ways of addressing these problems, and proposing possible solutions. Excellent, I think. Remember, there are different theories, but this is the one that I agree most with, so I hope you do too. Question 15. The fact that identical twins have more similar IQs than fraternal twins indicates that intelligence is strongly influenced by what? And the fact that twins raised together have more similar IQs than those raised apart, something play an important role. And the answer is genetics, and show that environmental factors play an important role, which makes sense. Question 16. The fact that IQ differences between African American and Caucasian American students has what in recent years is generally taken as evidence that this difference may largely be as a result of what factors? The answer is decreased and changeable environmental. And that concludes our quiz on intelligence. I hope you have learned something and can possibly extend this information to your own studies. Thanks for listening.